This is an Audio Wool original.
Oh my God, Craig's amazing. We will, Byron. And he's nice enough that he actually will keep talking to me because he's not rude enough to tell me to shut up. So we really need to do part 2. I have 30 questions that I came up with during the interview, and then, 20 of the 25 pages that we never even touched.
So anything that people could be looking forward to in this interview?
And understand how we got to this point in history, with pieces that you have not heard before, not just about UAPs, but about our country, separate from UAPs.
Sounds like a big one.
It's real big. It's real big. Also, maybe there's a lot of hope in there too. He keeps me from going in the doom and gloom direction that Byron's stuff pulls me in the direction of. So, yeah, Craig's great. Craig's really great. Craig, welcome. I've only been annoying you for months to do this. I really appreciate it. I know
yeah.
Pulling you away from research long enough to have a conversation about the stuff that's already known to you can be hard because you're trying to move everything forward. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
No, yeah. Thanks for having me on. And I definitely need to be pulled away from research. It helps
I know that feeling.
to try and contextualize this stuff for somebody else.
If you can imagine, it's actually scarier when, my daughters are now the age where they're kind of interested in all of this and they're pretty good at reading, and their grandmother taught them all about primary source research. So I'm literally hey girls, go to the Library of Congress website and see what you can find. So imagine if you had 2 weird little minions, then you really never pull yourself away.
We'll just bring them into the National Archives.
I know that's kind of what I'm hoping to do at some point. It'd be amazing.
Yeah.
So Craig Oliver, you are one of a pair of gentlemen, and at some point there was one more of you, but it's my understanding that Jeff has kind of faded to the background a little bit just because of all of the other work he's doing and maybe limitations he has with his security clearances in Australia. Is that accurate?
Jeff, we worked directly with for about a month.
Oh, okay. So
a year ago.
Really brief.
Yeah, it was Jeff and Michael who made the most headway on the Magenta specific stuff. And then this was just on Reddit too. None of us knew each other. It was just kind of constantly you guys should talk to each other. And then eventually we ended up in a group, the 3 of us and a couple others, and started building out this massive timeline. And
this timeline is I think that's what I want to make sure everybody understands. Kind of for those of you out there who are non-believers, this is kind of a lens into how did we get from before World War II, when we didn't really have any intelligence agencies, to today where it feels like there's nothing that's actually happening that we have crystal clear vision on because there are so many layers of intelligence agencies seemingly running everything. So even for the non-believers, it's the through line of how the hell did we get from point A to point B, and kind of looking around at how scary the world is, especially America right now. And then for the believers, it's that with the layer on top, how did we get from the first possibly recovered unidentified vehicle that David Grusch talked about, that happened in 1933 to today, where suddenly we're having congressional hearings, and maybe some of that is real and some of it's disinfo, but the topic of recovered vehicles is very much at the forefront in a way that it never has been. So we've got kind of 2 different lines, something for everybody is what I would say.
Right. Yeah. It's Grusch was the first to break big this 1933 story out of, Magenta, Italy. It had been covered by Roberto Pinotti before that, but...
And Roberto Pinotti, the Italian researcher, right?
right, the
Okay.
chief Italian researcher, and he was, given documentation back in the 90s that he then had authenticated, and he's been doing his own work over time, and his work goes back to the 60s when he was pretty young. But it also didn't get much traction outside of Italy, and what we're understanding now is that this stuff isn't taken that seriously in Italy at all. It is much more here in the US than over there.
Yeah.
And there's also the connection to Mussolini that, is not something they really want to touch on too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Understandably, same with the idea that Hitler and the Nazis may have had their hands on some sort of exotic technology and something else going on there. It's obviously really, really touchy territory. But I think it's also part of what we have to do.
Right.
If this part of what put us all in such a giant, almost cosmically bad spot
Y-
this last century, that's where it starts, really.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like one of the overarching themes that I've picked up from just really enjoying the research that you and Michael have done is this idea that if this was really the first recovered modern day crash, from the get go, it was like essentially obfuscated by powers that did not want the masses to know. And that was like at the gate. That's what it's been ever since.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think something I've had to wrap my head around more very recently is, this was early 30s, and especially back then, one thing that was very, very important to, one's status was the idea of bloodlines. And this is something that's coming up now in terms of understanding how this last century was built, even outside of this topic,
Yeah.
banking families, etc. For another, people genuinely believed in a mystical reality, a metaphysical reality, right? We had the spiritualism movement,
Yep.
Ark of the Covenant, all
Yep.
of these different things that people actually believed in,
Right.
some sort of magical component to reality.
Such a
And
good point.
so when you add in UAP, UFO, NHI, etc., for one, it's sounding like the Vatican has known about it the entire time it's been around.
Yeah.
And there are reports going on, back to before the Vatican was even formed. And, so it's like we've been gaslit for so long, and that's we can get around to that, but and
Yeah.
that's a result of these intelligence agencies. But if you look at the time period and you say, okay, cool, we found these, whatever you want. I mean, this is pre-flying saucer, but some sort of flying craft, and extraterrestrial, was not an entirely new term, and Tesla and Marconi and a lot of these people thought they were in contact, just the same way a lot of folks thought they were in contact with the dead.
Well, and I think it's so interesting too, because if you hear people talk about Tesla, people will equally acknowledge what a genius he was and that he was just kind of off his rocker too. Like it's not even a thought that like for most of mainstream science that, okay, he was a genius and maybe there was something to this, right? Like it's not even a possibility that when he talked about, talking to some type of being from some other realm, that could be true. That had to be like a layer of nonsense that was just poured on top of him actually being a genius. And I think people are so quick to make that demarcation.
Yeah, and I think, I putting together kind of side by side the advances in the technology, starting with Tesla and Marconi, on top of again this other layer of more, metaphysical um, avenue. I mean, the they basically both competed for the patent for wireless technology.
And just for the listeners, Craig, can you give just a quick overview of who Marconi is? I think everybody will know who Tesla is, but
Sure,
for
yeah,
those who
yeah.
don't.
He was,
Yeah.
yeah, very new to me going into this, but Marconi was a Guglielmo Marconi. He was an Italian scientist, researcher. kind of started out in the late 1800s, around the same time that Tesla was doing stuff. And they had, from what I understand, a fairly friendly competition. They both supposedly discovered radio waves around the same time in 1897. And after Marconi died in 1830 or 1938, the patent was revised so that they both shared it with two others.
Oh, interesting.
He was testing electromagnetic properties in the ionosphere. He, I think, won two Nobel Prizes. One of them was for that. He was put in charge of setting up the Vatican's radio system. They're really their service. It was the first of its kind in the world that I know of. So he was, very, very well respected, highly regarded in his field. Was trying to work with Americans. We think was working with um, not Morgan, but some of the others in the field. And so
Interesting.
you can kind of look at that side by side for folks that know about the Tesla story and how Tesla perhaps didn't understand as well how to capitalize upon his work, and how JP Morgan and sort of those powers that be back then sort of railroaded him, and that's another part of the story. But the birth of the robber baron class and those who were learning to harness energy.
Right,
When you
because he
had
was
guys,
just a trusting genius, kind of. He had no business
right,
sense whatsoever.
right. And here's a guy out the gate who thinks he's been given some sort of vision or something, and divine uh, download, as we call it now, regarding free energy. And so we're coming into an era of the advancement of the Industrial Revolution, the birth of the engine, the dependency on oil, understanding how to make these new machines run, these engines run, the birth of flight, birth of automobiles, etc. And so it seems like there was this really huge push-pull there,
Well,
between the ruling class realizing they could lose out on a lot of the power that they've
right,
held on to for so long by exploiting people as a source of energy. And now post-slavery, you've got this other function, and it's still a matter of like, no, nothing, this can't be free
right.
because then we're not going to profit from this.
Well, and it's so interesting because I think at least I go about my day and it just feels like, oh, this must be the way it's always been. But really, it's only been, maybe 100 plus a few years that we really have been at the mercy of those energy empires, right? And like you
Right.
said, energy in a different form before that. But it's so
Hmm.
easy. Most people, maybe I'm just really naive, but most people probably go about their day similarly saying, oh, yeah, well, like being at the behest of, slave owners or something of that sort is something of the past. And the way you're discussing it, I think, is really fascinating. So we've got these people who have moved in and they see that this is a possibility, this free energy idea, and it really is the biggest threat. I don't know, in the same way that the civil rights movement was a threat to people, in the same way that the end of slavery was a threat to people. But this is another historic marker of a place where we could have become more egalitarian, and instead it went the exact opposite direction.
Yeah, there's a guy who's been making the rounds. I had to look him up here, make sure I got his name right. Matthew Zydagas,
Ooh,
Szydagas.
okay.
And he's a part of the alternative propulsion conversations that have been going on the past few years with some other guys I know. And he's been doing more and more work, and I think he's supposed to be dropping some papers in the next couple months
Ooh.
about, yeah, reverse engineering material, things like this. He's been working on
Do you know what
this.
his background is, where he comes from?
He he comes out of the world of dark energy and dark matter
Okay.
research.
Okay.
He had a long interview on Danny Jones
Oh, okay.
2 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was kind of, I'd seen some of his other interviews, and then this was kind of the big one for him.
Okay.
And I remember one thing that stuck out to me in that was he talked about, we discovered electricity at some point and had no idea what to do with it and spent however many decades learning to harness electricity and bend it to our will, and learn what to make of that. So imagine you keep going a step up, right? Radio waves, electromagnetic waves, possibly now whatever constitutes dark matter, dark energy, anti-gravity, antimatter, a lot of these heady ideas that we've heard about for a long time, but we haven't known what to do with any of them and if
Right.
anybody was making any real headway. And maybe we're at the point now that people are actually making headway, and that scares some other folks in charge.
Right.
So you take it back 100 something years to, again, the idea of harnessing electricity, harnessing free energy, the ether, vacuum energy, as Hal Puthoff has been talking about it, 0 point energy. And again, you've got folks like JP Morgan, who's like, no, I'm going to set up the Federal Reserve,
Right.
and we're just learning to monetize oil, and we're building these engines, et cetera. Yeah, and then we can look at what that means now in comparison and why, and that's more we can get into in a bit. There's a pretty easy direct connection there, but why this has been scaring people for a while, why this has been scaring a certain ruling class for a while.
Well, and I think that ruling class has been very successful in giving everyone else other reasons to be scared of it, to keep it even further at arm's length, right? Like whether that's, I don't know. I don't even know if I want to go in that direction, but people even discussing this stuff being demonic. When you hear that there are literally generals in our government that are discussing these NHI as being demonic in nature, I mean, that's pretty terrifying to me, that's the lens through which it's being viewed.
Well, and that's I think a good chunk of the angle is that to look at a certain religious order, and maybe this goes back further than most people realize, and this is something that's been coming up in some of this research. When you get into Knights of Malta, going back to the Crusades, et cetera, I mean, this is such a much bigger thing leading into the Vatican during World War II and a lot of the involvement there.
Okay, so I have to do this because every time I listen to somebody talk about the Knights of Malta, I'm like, can somebody just give me a background, like a Cliff Notes version of how did the Knights of Malta start and what exactly is it? I mean, secret society, right? But it seems to be kind of in discussions recently. It sounds like the secret society to end all secret societies.
That's what I'm understanding. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my grasp of it is pretty basic and rudimentary. So I don't have any choice but to lay it out in the most simplistic terms.
I love that. That's great.
But yeah, my understanding is that a lot of the sort of Knights of Templar stuff, goes back however many centuries. And around World War II, the Vatican, which is its own sovereign nation.
Which is so crazy.
Yeah, it's like, what is it? Like a nation without a country,
Yeah.
because it's really just that little piece of land they have.
Yep.
But it means they have jurisdiction and they can issue passports and you can travel under the order of the Vatican. Well, Malta was set up the same way by the Vatican. So it's also a sovereign nation without a country. Malta is just this tiny island, but it's its own country. And so it's the same deal. I think currently it has something like 800 passports active worldwide.
Wow.
That's how tiny it is, but it's sort of like this hyper elite, especially then. Apparently, Knights of Malta was considered to be actually in charge of the OSS. And a lot of the members of the OSS were members of the Knights of Malta. And there's a pretty intense crossover between the Knights of Malta and something like Yale Skull and Bones.
Okay, so were they citizens of Malta?
Some of them, yes.
but not
Some of
all.
the like James Angleton, let's say, who was chief in the OSS and then chief later at the CIA. Yeah, he definitely was. And there were others as well, but I probably confuse some of that. But I'll say Angleton specifically
Okay.
definitely was.
Okay.
So it meant, even that was a thing where our buddy Jeff brought up at some point, explained to me how basically Angleton's involvement with the Knights of Malta and their jurisdiction gave him immunity over a lot of the crimes he was committing around the world.
Because of the jurisdictional situation, just like the Vatican.
Right.
Holy shit.
Right. So think of it that way. And that puts the Vatican in a weird light, and especially part of what's been coming up more around this topic and World War II and this whole story, and where a lot of it begins, is the Vatican's involvement with the Italian mafia, especially back then, and the Italian mafia, in a way, worked as an arm of their own intelligence service.
Right.
Right. So you've got the biggest religious institution on the planet going back to the birth of Christ, turning turning a blind eye to a lot of criminal activity
Right.
if it meant they kept a leg up in the world.
Well, and it's funny because growing up, I feel like that was a narrative that wasn't totally foreign to me. The idea that the Vatican and mafia had certainly, I mean, I feel like there were hints of that even in The Godfather, right? Like,
Right.
That being a piece. And so once you make that leap, it doesn't seem like it's that much further that the U.S. government would find a leg in there somewhere too. I mean, that's certainly on brand.
Right, right. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing, thanks to Grusch, especially kind of laying it out, and then a lot of us took the long road around. But, if you look at the birth of the CIA as being a joint effort between old money and these guys coming out of the OSS who were involved with the Vatican, involved with the Italian mafia, you really get this picture of, even if you take the UAP aspect out of it, it just seems like this is something we should all know.
Exactly. And that's what I really am trying. Anybody that will listen to me for 5 minutes about this, that's what I try to push with them. I'm like, okay, you can be a UFO fanatic like me and be interested from that angle. But as a citizen of the world, even if you take that out, this is still hugely important.
Right. I mean, really understanding how powerful the CIA has been. Well, most people who know anything about the CIA understand how dirty it's been. But I think really understanding how it was put together and why, at least, in terms of the power structure. And in the added element is that it was put together right after Roswell.
Right.
And it was put together to include the folks who had already dealt with the Magenta retrieval during World War II.
And those common names, I think, is one of the pieces that adds so much credibility to this story.
Right. And you can even, it's kind of like if you take the Magenta craft out of it and you at least acknowledge that the timing of the formation of the National Security Council and the Air Force and Department of Defense and the CIA 2 months after Roswell,
Literally,
as well as MJ-12, which is turning out to be a reality,
yep,
is not one giant coincidence.
Yeah.
And then you look at, okay, well, who are these people and why were they entrusted with these positions of power? Then you can go back to the story that we've been putting together around Magenta and how high up all of these people were in the OSS and in the Navy. And you start to see these major names in that world, but also in the world of the CIA, and also folks like Eisenhower and Nixon and these major names who yeah, obviously held the highest echelons of power in our country.
Yeah.
And a lot of it wasn't just because they fought so hard during World War II. It
So,
was because they could keep the secret really well.
right. And they'd shown that they could. And they
Right.
were power hungry enough that that was their incentive beyond. So it was real
Yes.
safe to put it in their
Right.
hands. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
So, okay, backing up to the beginning with the OSS, obviously precursor to CIA, what were the origin points of the OSS, though, feeding into this, if that's helpful to go into? If not, we can skip forward to whatever point. But
No, sure. Yeah, yeah. No, it's something we've gone over ourselves a lot. So the OSS was basically leading into World War II. It began with Germany invading Poland and the rest of Europe as it could in 1939. And Mussolini's son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano, was in charge of, he was kind of like the foreign ministry, the leader of the foreign ministry press. But behind the scenes, he was in charge of dealing with Allied and German intelligence, as well as dealing with the research into the Magenta craft and whatever else they had. But again, even if you just take that part out of it for now, he was doing the best he could to keep Italy out of the war because the relationship between Hitler and Mussolini was one in which Mussolini was as power hungry as Hitler was, but maybe wasn't quite as genocidal in his
right,
in his aim. And
his fascism had a stopping point, maybe.
there it
Yeah.
did. Right, right. As much as he was a colonist as well, he was still, there was a certain degree that he wasn't willing to go to. And so there was a huge concerted effort to keep Italy out of the war, basically until Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and the US would be entering the war afterward. And at that point, Italy joined the war as well. But it was about a year or two prior to that, in 1940, that Churchill and FDR knew that the UK and the US would be joining the war imminently. They knew it was around the corner.
Right.
So they set up, at the time, radar was just being developed. They gave Vannevar Bush at Raytheon the contracts to set up radar for the UK and the US.
And just to be clear, because speaking of bloodlines, this gets a little confusing. Vannevar is not related to George and George W., right?
No, they were like second cousins.
Okay, so but they are okay.
But
That's good
not
to know.
super. It was something like their grandfathers were brothers.
Oh,
So
okay,
it wasn't super far removed, actually.
interesting. Okay,
There's no mention of relationship between Vannevar Bush and Prescott Bush or George H.W. Bush later at all. We found nothing.
but it exists.
There's a lineage there.
Oh,
Like
okay. I'm so glad I brought that up then, because I've always
Yeah.
operated under the idea that it was two totally different. Whew.
Yeah, no,
Fascinating.
not a far off connection there at all.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. So
No, it's
Vannevar.
okay. Yeah, so Vannevar Bush, highly elite figure in science, came out of the world of Carnegie and had been at MIT forever. He was the first science advisor to a president ever, to FDR.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he eventually was put in charge of OSRD and of the Manhattan Project, and later MJ12. He was a very, like, the crucial scientific figure behind all of this. And he just so happened to also be given the contracts for radar for the UK and the US leading into the war. And this is important because it's thought that early on, radar, as our first electromagnetic pulse device, and which was devised out of death ray technology, might have been perhaps how we started shooting down UFOs.
Oh my God.
Right. So you've got him at the center of that as well, maybe by accident, shooting these things down. And they knew all about it. And
And
so you get into 41, you've got this whole history. You've got a history of all these folks who knew about Magenta, right? We know now that a lot of the folks on Wall Street, the Rockefellers, the Bushes knew about it. FDR knew about it. All these Italian scientists that worked on it. Fermi, who'd already gone to work with guys like Teller and Niels Bohr and stuff. Like the entire science world probably knew about it. Fission, nuclear fission came out of most likely came out of Fermi's studies into the fusion reactor in this craft. Something else I've been working on.
wow.
So a lot more
Okay.
people understood this thing, but it's
So why
also
didn't it spread beyond that, do you think? Like why didn't the scientists discuss it more?
they could have. I think it was just at the time that especially the sort of academic rigor then more so even now. I mean, they were held in such high regard, more than they are now to a large degree. But I think there was so much on the line that that was probably one of those things, especially then you didn't really cross. You didn't say like, oh, we've heard about this magical ship
Right.
that can
Well, and it's
fly
the
with
whole
no wings.
different feel of patriotism that existed then versus does now too. I
Right.
think is always a lens that I have to remember to bring in.
Sure, yeah, and especially, there in the 20s, 30s, when you've got the rise of Hitler and Mussolini and, you know, folks who left Germany and Italy under their racial laws. And so even then the split in science between fascist scientists like Heisenberg in Germany,
Right.
some folks had studied under, like Fermi and Teller in 32 before the rise of Hitler. And then you've got a lot of the folks who were European Jews who left after persecution
Right.
because of these racial laws, and eventually a lot of them made their way to the US as well as, I'm come from a film world, so you got a lot of famous filmmakers and
Yeah.
writers, things like that, who all defected to the US to escape all of that turmoil.
Only to be joined by all the Nazis a few years later when they came to.
Sure, but nobody knew about that for a
Right.
little bit.
Right. Right.
That's another huge part of this story as well.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest part, was a lot of those deals that were made and in the influence, it seems like that held in a greater regard than anyone's really understood.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, Losing track of where we are right now,
No,
actually.
no, no. That's okay. So we've got the starting the OSS, just all the presence over in Europe as the war was getting, well, as we were getting involved in the war, but also understanding how radar played into it, and that
Right.
this was the way that maybe some of those crafts started getting shot down. Which, of course, for the normies among us, I feel like Foo Fighters are the first things that pop into our heads about World War II and these craft. Was there any relationship there that you've been able to see? Like, does that have anything to do with firing upon these things? Or do you think that was one of these, at least I don't understand, plasma science pieces that is like so far over my head. I try to read the research papers and I'm like, oh my God.
Well, one of the big things that's come out in the past year and a half or two, thanks to our buddy Jeff Cruikshank, he was just way ahead of a lot of us and a lot of this stuff. He's also got a top secret
Yeah, I was
clearance,
going to
and
say,
so,
how has he not lost that? Like, does that make you, I don't know. I feel
well,
like everybody's
he's
so,
in Australia,
right.
so
And
he hasn't
Australia isn't
given any
fascist. So,
Australian rules.
right. Okay.
He's afraid to come. He's literally afraid to come to the U.S.
I don't blame him. I would be too.
because
Oh
he
my God.
thinks that he's like, that's it. I go to prison as soon as I get there. Like he will not come visit here at all.
Wow.
He's an interesting guy. And if anybody out there doesn't know who we're talking about, Jeff Cruikshank, yeah, he was a guy that we met on Reddit, and just yeah, he was way ahead of everybody doing a lot of this deep dive research. And then we kind of joined forces for about a month, and then he dropped everything he had, and he's like, I have to work a real job. I have an actual career and profession.
Right.
And then about a month later, he showed up publicly for the first time in this big interview with Ross Coulthart. And that for us was this huge deal. Suddenly like somebody put it together right away. Like, oh, that's
That's the guy.
this guy on Reddit. And we're like, that's our buddy.
Oh
And
my
that's who he
gosh.
is in real life. And oh, he's this Australian, like former, their equivalent of the CIA or something.
Right. And he was
Um,
talking about what was on Coulthart. It was the double blue prime, whatever. I
oh, the,
was,
the blue gold triple prime.
yep,
Right,
yep.
right. And that's I think on top of the other stuff, the Magenta story and some of the rest of that was and it's actually still something he's got some more stuff to lay out that I can't really get into. But
Ooh, okay.
uh more firsthand correlation, I'll say,
Okay, well, that's
regarding
amazing. It's actually probably good we can't get into it because, oh my God, I could,
and we would
rabbit
just keep going.
hole
Yeah.
along the rabbit hole all day. So that's
Right.
good.
But I would say, yeah, if you look up, yeah, Jeff Cruikshank, Bluegill Triple Prime, its involvement with JFK and LBJ, and our first nuclear atmospheric test in October 1962, and there's a whole lot there. That's one of its own huge threads to pull on. But
Wow.
I've been doing what I can to work with Jeff to kind of make it presentable.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it's out there, yeah.
Okay.
But if you go back, to us getting into World War One and the advent of radar, in 1941, there was a crash retrieval in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, that
Yep.
had uh, beings, bodies, little beings.
And because I have to, what are the
Yeah.
reports that you look at that say it had the bodies in it?
The
Like,
main the main story behind Cape Girardeau that actually, I mean, this came out 40 years ago in the 80s, but it was this woman who had grown up with the story. Like she was there, she didn't see everything, but her father was a priest who had been woken up in the middle of the night to give last rites to this dying being. And even that story, I mean, the super basics, there's not a ton that's known, but the general narrative of it is that, something happened, there was a crash. The town, for about 2 hours, the town was taking care of it, their fire department, their police, there were a lot of just normal citizens, from the town who were out there. And then the US Army Air Force showed up and they scared everybody off. They took control of the scene. Apparently, over the next few days and weeks, they, terrorized some of the folks in town who were there. There were some suspicious, suicides. And that's about all there is known. There's some other things I'm forgetting, but there were nearby military tests that might have affected bringing down this craft.
which seems to be a recurring theme, of course.
Right, right. And then, the next year, 1942, before we go to war, there was the pretty famous Battle of Los Angeles.
We have a giant blow up canvas of it in our living room.
Oh, nice.
Literally,
Yeah.
like huge.
Really?
Yep.
So apparently the story there is there were two craft that were brought down. There were bodies recovered. I think one of the craft was off the coast of Long Beach, and one was in the mountains of San Bernardino.
So this
if
is a
you're in
part of that
LA
story that I feel like is rarely heard. People talk about Battle of Los Angeles pretty frequently, but the retrievals, I don't know if you can go into some detail with those, just because I think that's pretty new
Yeah.
to most.
I don't remember any details about maybe what species those bodies might have
I know,
belonged
right?
to.
Like it's funny because I'm starting to have those same like words in my dialogue with people. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
oh my God, I'm actually saying this. But
Yeah, right,
yeah,
right.
like if Eric Davis says it, I guess we can say it. So
Right, yeah. I mean, I will say that, especially that both basically those two incidents led to the formation of an organization called the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. And this was very much in question until recently.
was it a
Very,
subgroup of somebody else or was it totally independent?
um, I don't know who was in charge, but I know that FDR and Vannevar Bush
Okay.
basically like were in charge of putting it together. I don't know who ran it or anything, but it was basically an open group, and they understood that there was something else going on. They saw it as extraterrestrial. Obviously, we're shooting them down and not vice versa. So if you want to start at that narrative too,
Right.
you know, and how that shifted over time to the scary aliens and stuff, it's like, no, from the beginning, we were shooting them down,
Right.
whoever they were. And then they were also supposedly gifting us things, and you've got a bunch of different things going on. So, but there was this group that was formed, and then we get into World War II, and yeah, immediately we encounter the Foo Fighters in Germany. And I didn't see until recently, but they were specifically going after the American planes. And so that also sounds like Germany was reverse engineering maybe some of these spheres that we're seeing all over the place.
Kind of a
Maybe they figured that out.
serendipitous. Today's Veterans Day. I'm obviously not like some huge patriotic person, especially these days, but my grandfather was a pilot in World War II and did not share a lot of stories. He had so many bombing missions. I mean, obviously, I think the PTSD that goes with being any kind of a in combat military individual. But my dad did share with me recently that there were at least a couple stories he discussed about, he and his friends encountering these Foo Fighters. And it's just so strange, over the years, I guess I've kind of slowly brushed it off as being, it's probably ball lightning, because we don't even really understand ball lightning, right? Like probably some interesting scientific element in and of itself. But based on what you've found, do you think there's some credibility that this was something pretty far beyond ball lightning then?
Oh, most likely, yeah. There was definitely seemed to be some sort of intentionality, and ball lightning.
Suppose it isn't going to choose American aircraft over.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Ball lightning doesn't give a shit. Right.
Right.
But also, I mean, ball lightning, until maybe recently, we don't know if it's ever been properly tracked. So it was also one of these phenomenon that had never actually been captured on film or video or anything.
Oh my gosh.
And there's maybe some videos this past year that, could very well be ball lightning, but for up until now, over decades, it just became another kind of throwaway excuse for what any of this stuff could have been.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. I'm totally making a note to send a question to one of my friends that I've made through all of this, who is working on developing a radar project, kind of like crowdsource radar, to try and monitor and gather data on UFOs so that it's not going through the government. He's a engineer, scientist, inventor, and he's done a ton with radar and with weather. So I feel like I need to ask him, like, have you ever...
Is this Jim Sakala?
No, his name's Mitch Randall. And so he's got...
Mitch Randall, that's right.
Yeah,
no, I've seen his interviews as well.
He's phenomenal. And I always joke, like the movie Twister, like those mobile radar, like tornado detection devices, he invented that. Like, so like his background is very much hard science, and he comes at it from that lens, but he's just lovely. And I'm sure now I've got to ask, okay, what do you know about ball lightning? Have you ever done any tracking with radar and ball lightning? Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, look at, the past few years, there's been more talk about these spheres that have been seen. A lot of the videos I was seeing 2020, 2021, the best ones I was seeing were these spheres, and then now we've got the Booga sphere and some other spheres around it, these other videos that have been coming out, and more. There was one the other day that just came out, it was pretty good. And
yeah,
so it's kind of, another like sort of basic reality, like there's something going on, whatever it means.
Yep.
This is ancient stuff. It's been around a long time, some sort of monitoring system.
Well, and I've even become fascinated with some of like the very old Renaissance, sometimes even earlier paintings that depict weird things. Right. And a lot of those are spherical, like very,
and pictures of them holding spheres. Things like that, being imbued with information or,
Yep. My favorite, now I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it's supposed to depict Mary receiving the message from Gabriel that she was pregnant. And it's literally a flipping UFO hovering beaming down to her in a house.
Yeah,
like,
I remember that.
literally. It's crazy. Yeah.
Right.
Anyhow.
Right. So, I mean, but in a way, it makes it sound less absurd that this has been around a long time, whatever that means.
Yeah, they're breadcrumbs, a lot of them.
Right. And also, I mean, we are a more secular society than we've ever been. But at the same time, I mean, up until recently, a belief in something bigger was the norm. And so if you look at, we're moving away from maybe organized religion, and especially right now, not to get into it really, but the obvious political climate and a lot of the controversy around the newest, what the current form and exploitative faction of some of these old beliefs in a modern era,
Yep.
how those have transmogrified and are causing even more people to look at them with more scrutiny, let's
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. And understand
And
that, okay, there may be some truth in here, but it's been framed in a way that probably isn't helping us.
sure, right. And exploited in a way in our modern day that is not healthy or good for a lot of people.
Right. Right. Byron, this is when
and
you're
it
supposed to
seems
press the button to play Peter Thiel Knows About the Antichrist song.
Sure, yeah.
That's when you're
Yeah,
supposed
right.
to. Okay.
Right.
We
But
have
even
it.
that,
Yeah.
you start getting into that stuff and like how this overlaps with somebody like Thiel and the idea of a technocratic state,
Yeah.
and a lot of these other guys and Elon and his Sig Heil and all this stuff, and really sort of seeing who these people are on their face, and even those guys go back, there's this idea that they're ordained or divinely anointed to lead us into the future, except that their future is like pretty scary and dark and
Real scary. Yeah.
yeah,
Except for maybe for them. I don't know. They seem real excited about it, but
because they don't care. They'll hide in their bunkers,
real
they've all
fancy
got 'em,
bunkers.
you know that,
Yep.
and so
Yeah.
that's another thing. But I just think in general, maybe part of this shift that we're living through is, yeah, moving from organized religion to, a more open discussion about spirituality. And with that, maybe the idea that there is something else that's been here a long time that we don't totally understand, or a bunch of things that have been here a long time that
And
we
that,
don't totally
that
understand.
carries
They're
enough
making themselves more
importance
important.
that
Right.
people have gone to these lengths for this many years to keep it under wraps and to try to keep it at bay or keep their arms around it in a way that they and they alone can wield the power of it.
Right, right. So you can kind of, yeah, I mean, even jumping back, basically, so you've got this interplanetary phenomenon unit. Military, the government is very well aware there's something else here. They don't know what it is. They're calling it ET because that's all they really knew at the time. And then we go into the war. We encounter the Foo Fighters. We have the story around the Magenta craft and possibly other things the Italians had, things that the Nazis had. They seem to have two separate divisions, basically. And it
Okay.
seems like the Italians were doing their best to not let the Nazis get their hands on what the Italians had. And we're
Okay.
still figuring that part of it out because it seems like a real fine line.
Well, and you kind of hinted at that even from a military standpoint. Byron, did you just kill my video?
Battery died. It's switching cameras.
Oh, sorry. But even for, like the idea that from a military standpoint, there was a fine line with Italy deciding, okay, fine, I guess we have to jump into bed with Hitler and get on board, right? Like it wasn't this clear-cut allegiance from the get-go.
No, right.
So it kind of does make sense that if they had possession of this incredibly advanced knowledge, it would be a very delicate fine line between, okay, are we going to share it or are we not going to share it? And so,
yeah,
it
for
sounds like
sure.
you're underway with learning about that. But based on what you've seen so far, when do you think that sharing happened, or is that totally unclear?
It's kind of unclear. We know that Pope Pius XII, who became Pope right before Germany invaded Poland, there was some deal that was made in 33. It sounds like the Concordant deal between Italy and Germany, which was kind of the birth of the Axis powers, was signed directly after Magenta.
Oh my God.
And there's this guy, Cardinal Spellman, who was integral to working with the Pope and the story around whatever exotic material Germany and Italy had. But then Spellman was kind of his own strange figure, and he was sent to be, I think, like the Archbishop of New York.
Wait a second. So he was part of the Vatican, but he was a scientist?
Not a scientist, no,
Okay.
Cardinal Spellman.
Oh,
He
cardinal.
was
For
just
some reason,
another,
I thought you said
just,
colonel. Okay, got it.
oh no,
Nope.
sorry.
Nope.
No,
You're good.
yeah, just this figure that apparently a lot of folks in the church didn't like, and so they got him out of the way.
No kidding.
And but somehow he became central to a lot of this stuff, all the way through Roswell and after. And he just like ran the weird desk in the US for the Vatican. We're trying to sort of understand some of this stuff. I have a buddy who's been looking into it more. He gets that. I haven't wrapped my head around it all yet.
Oh my gosh.
But
Okay.
he's been around it, so it's, again, the Vatican knew all about all this stuff. And it looks like, yeah, Pope Pius, before he was Pope Pius XII, in 36, that he was family friends with the Kennedys, who were family friends with Forrestal's. And so they all knew each other.
Okay, hold on just a second. So this is a part that I think is, I mean, so Forrestal and Kennedy were actually close, or
They
at
were
least their
family
families
friends.
were.
Going back, yeah, like going back generations.
Okay.
And then Kennedy served under Forrestal in World War II. And supposedly at the end of World War II, they went together to Germany looking for the Nazi secret super weapons.
Wow.
We know that Forrestal was integral to the recovery of Magenta, but JFK, I think some folks found that he was sick at the time. So he wasn't in combat. He wasn't in an active duty because he was pretty sick.
So recovery is in bringing it to the U.S., right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Forrestal had just been named Secretary of the Navy like 3 weeks prior. And there were a lot of things that happened. The date that he was named that is like May 10th, 1944. There were a bunch of other things that happened that same day. This big memo put out by James Angleton about making sure that Italy were, going to be these supreme allies to the U.S. I think a meeting between Karl Wolff, who was one of the leading
Yeah.
Nazi intelligence officers, and the Pope. And the meeting might have been to abandon the bunker where the craft and some other material were being stored. A few other things I found recently, I'm forgetting right now. But yeah, kind of May
Wow.
10th was like
It's like,
giant decision day we're going to go on this mission, get as much, clear out the beach, clear out the path all the way through Rome, bring this thing down.
oh my
And
God.
yeah, I don't want to, I'm trying not to jump around too much, but
No,
the
that's
basic stuff.
fascinating. I mean, it sounds like basically an agreement was reached and like, okay, we're going to put out
Right.
these positive statements about how great Italy is in exchange for you guys giving us this craft and you can trust us with it because we aren't Hitler. And
Right. And in terms of the allegiance, when you look at the time frame, Italy got into the war in 42 around the same time that we did. And so you've got Mussolini's son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano, who was the central figure in this entire story, but dealing with all of the intelligence, the U.S. allies, of course, the Italians, the Nazis, the Holy See at the Vatican, their own intelligence service. He was dealing with everything. He was dealing with the research team working on the Magenta craft.
what was his background to like bring him in? Was it simply that he married Mussolini's daughter or was
Pretty
his
much,
background?
yeah.
Okay. So
He
he didn't
married
have
an
like some robust background that made him a perfect candidate for that.
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, he married Ida Ciano, Mussolini's daughter, in 1930, and Mussolini was already working at building up his army. And then in 33, this crash retrieval happens, and Ciano was immediately named, I think, like domestic press minister or something. Like he's in charge of what stories are disseminated, and Mussolini had this strict lockdown on any information about this getting out there. And then things just get more complicated as they're leading into the war, and then during the war, and then Italy entering the war. But really, I mean, Italy enters the war in 42 after Ciano had been trying really hard to not get the country into that. A year later, he votes Mussolini out of office. And that's the end of Mussolini's fascist regime. And he, for some reason, he's demoted from his foreign press ministry job and given a role at the Vatican's Holy See. And then in January of 44, Hitler orders Mussolini to execute him. And Mussolini executes his own son-in-law.
Which is just...
Well, there's a lot to be said just for that. Why would you...
Well, I mean, Mussolini was a little bit... But yeah.
Sure, yeah. But it's kind of like, why would you choose... What was there to be gained?
Right.
After choosing Hitler's orders over the, one of your right-hand men who is married to your daughter.
Your daughter, yeah. I mean...
And so... And there's stuff that we're finding more and more about that timeline, and really that's the biggest story we've been uncovering is this thing called the McGregor Project, which has been buried since then. I mean, there's been mentions of it over time that we found kind of, hiding in plain sight, but for the most part, this thing has been completely buried, and very much intentionally so.
And where have you found it? Where have you guys dug it up? What are some... Yeah.
So that was a thing that Jeff initially found. I'm not sure how, but in records for William Donovan, Donovan was the head of the OSS at the time, had been put in charge of running it, was later involved in the CIA. But he was kind of the old school general in charge of a lot of these operations.
Wild Bill.
We know he was in charge of the operation he was in charge of the operations for the liberation of Rome, the storming of Normandy, and those events were centered around recovering this craft. And I think the more we can prove that, or we're at 98% certain.
Okay.
The more we can prove that, that's going to be the real kicker.
So in terms of proving that, we're talking, like Library of Congress records of Donovan's papers, or...
Yeah, we know where we have a lot of his papers already from the National Archives. Pretty much everything that's been digitized. And then his printed communications are at an army barracks in Pennsylvania. So that's part of this other project we're working on.
Do you know where in Pennsylvania?
Carlisle Barracks, sorry. I forget where in Pennsylvania that is, but apparently anybody can go and get access.
We need to figure out if we know somebody in Pennsylvania. Byron, you were just in Pennsylvania. God damn it. He was there a few months ago.
Yeah, it's on our list. I mean, it's this other project we've talked with you about, but this the AI database thing we're working on loosely. That's part of it is going to be pulling physical records and digitizing them and getting them into this timeline. And that's the first thing I want to do is go to grab all of Donovan's communication.
Oh my gosh.
During this time period. Because what's making more and more, even last night, so, some of what I found last couple nights, working with a couple other people, it looks like, so Mussolini is deposed from power. It's the fall of the fascist regime, because I guess Italy was still sort of a democracy.
Right.
And,
yeah.
And he was arrested by whomever else in charge at the time. And he gets sent out of the country. He's being sent to some sort of jail. There's a whole operation for, Hitler and the Germans to rescue him. But in the middle of all that, Italy surrenders to the Allies. But as that happens, Germany and the Nazis take control over a lot of the country. Including Sarate bunker, including all of this.
Yeah.
There's apparently other stuff. There were apparently plans by the Nazis to take over the Vatican completely. And
Really? I
I
mean, I
just
guess it
learned
makes
that,
sense that
but
there would be plans. Did it come anywhere close to happening?
no, because somebody told Hitler that was going too far. They're like, this will look bad.
Bridge too far, dude.
Bridge too far, yeah. But there were, I guess a lot of their artifacts and historical records were scattered intentionally throughout the city, the Vatican's, so that they weren't centralized. And so if the Nazis did take over, they couldn't destroy things in one fell swoop. And obviously
Wow.
the Vatican's history again is bigger than most on the planet. So kind of this understanding that we have now is that so in late July of 43 is the fall of Mussolini's regime. There's a battle over Italy between the Nazis and the US. The Italians surrendered to the US, to the Allies. Well, yeah, US, UK. But Germany still has a major presence in Italy, including its Sarate bunker, where supposedly the craft and a lot of these other materials were stored. And the Germans, Kesselring and Karl Wolff, the chief German intelligence officers in charge, made Sarate bunker their headquarters. So they knew, that's how important this was to both countries, and really to all three.
Wow.
Yeah. And so in September, we put this together last night.
And what was special about Sarate? Just before what you put together
Sure.
last night, we'll come right back to.
Right.
But because I think it's important that people understand why. Okay, whatever, it's a bunker. Like, what is the big deal?
Okay, yeah. So Sarate bunker construction began in 1937. It was built just north of Rome and right underneath. I think around Mount Apollo, I'm sorry, right underneath the Temple of Apollo. So a very historic religious site,
Yeah.
and I think that's important. But it's pure conjecture. But I think they built it there because they thought it had mystical properties and maybe divine protection. So they built this bunker. It was the biggest bunker in Europe at the time. And mind you, again, construction begins in 1937. So we're 2 years out from Germany declaring war, 5 years out from Italy entering the war. So why else would you start building
Right.
this massive bunker? And it was being built right at the end of Guglielmo Marconi's life. So it looked like some of the research was possibly being transferred. Or maybe
Oh.
Fermi took control of the team before he defected to the US, as the racial laws were being implemented. But basically, it became the biggest bunker in the time of Europe. We're just learning more now from, the director of our documentary. He's been on the ground there for a little over a month, but he met with the mayor of the town where the Sarate bunker is and came pretty close with him. And we had a big talk with him about a week ago. He knows the entire story. And we've met with a couple of other big researchers as well who told us that Sarate was basically their Area 51. So it wasn't just the Magenta craft. Apparently they had a bunch of stuff that they were testing, and then there's an airfield at the bottom of the hill from the bunker where they were testing out a lot of these new planes that were inspired by whatever else they were finding.
And it's no longer active at all. Like it's just a historical site now.
Yeah,
Okay.
very much so. Yeah,
Okay.
and they've actually right after. Oh, that was another thing on that date that it was abandoned was one of the main tunnels where they were doing some of the testing. The Germans completely detonated on their way out,
I
and
have
it's
to
still
ask,
pure rubble.
is
Because it's so dangerous. They've just left it alone. There's like a walkway.
nobody's dug into that?
No, because they don't know if there's live munitions. They think there very well could be. They have no clue.
Somebody get some LiDAR. Somebody
Yeah,
like
but also because it's a tunnel and because it was set up to detonate behind itself if there was any sort of infiltration. Now, if you do anything wrong, you just blow in the entire tunnel and that's it.
right.
And so they have to for now, just leave it alone. They don't know what to do with it. So,
Okay. Are there any records that you've seen of Kammler being at Sarate?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
As much as
I'm obsessed
I'm
with Kammler
learning,
now. So, okay.
right, that he was central to those studies as well. I know that it was more Kesselring and Carl Wolf.
Okay.
We don't know. We're not really sure how much how much research was being done by the Nazis there
Okay.
because they only had control of it for about a year, So, and it seemed like there was more of a battle to get their hands on whatever was hiding as well as whatever Ciano had regarding the research in his diaries. And so we don't think they had their hands on it directly. We don't know what that means though, And we do know that there were things confiscated when after the liberation of Rome opened up that pathway and we started retrieving materials. We don't know who got what, how much we got, how much the Nazis might have had. We know that they had their own underground bases. We know that they had research facilities in Austria. There were all of these things found later. But that's a history that's like too rich. I haven't gone into it all
Well,
yet.
yeah.
It's
I
still
mean, yeah,
passing.
totally.
But it existed supposedly.
Okay.
And yeah, so as far as Kammler, I mean, my guess is that he was more central in the research facilities in Germany or Austria
Okay.
than he was at Sarate.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Just thinking, yeah,
Yeah.
towards the end of the war when he had so much more control over all of the weapons development, when he kind of stepped into that
Right,
role.
right. So
Man.
kind of this new understanding is that Mussolini falls, Italy surrenders to the US. We're battling over this heavy German presence there. And it looks like that's the point in September 43. That's the point when James Angleton joins the OSS. And it actually makes even more sense regarding this story because, he supposedly lived in Milan, 3 miles from the crash with his family when it happened. Maybe saw the craft at some
And how
point.
old was he at that point?
He was 14,
Okay.
33. And then he went off to college in England, was friends with Ezra Pound, was way more into poetry.
Oh my God.
And then
What?
post-college got into training for, these intelligence services. And yeah, as soon as we decide to take immediate action in Italy, that's when he joins. So it almost further highlights how important he was to the Italian intelligence regarding this craft and where things might have been. So there's this,
Wow.
this long buried McGregor project we've been finding more and more stuff out about that, was Donovan, Vannevar Bush, Alan Dulles, James Forrestal, it was the hunt for this one particular scientist and these electromagnetic devices, these anti-torpedo devices that he had, and we're just finding out now too. They were, part of this mission in September, October 1943. They were Italian scientists brought over to, I think it was Newport, Rhode Island,
Oh.
and they had like an anti-torpedo factory there or something. They were testing this stuff out, and they had some submarines, and technology they'd been working on. They brought over secretly, and so that was some back and forth. And then uh, Ciano gets executed on January 11th, 44, and the day after they expedite everything, trying to retrieve everything, because I think Ciano was their go-to.
And so
You
that
know,
was the sign that, okay, we can't be sneaky anymore. We just have to go all out,
yeah,
get
and
what we can
then
get.
yeah, so 10 days later they try to clear out this beach. They try to clear this path, and they fail. They don't fail completely, but it's, the Germans hold their own, and they don't get as far in the mission as they would like, and that's January. And so then whatever happens between January and May, June, there are other folks who come into play. They have their own interesting stories in the OSS, and these Italian admirals that are brought into the picture to help them plan out navigating some of the ocean stuff and, the more naval operations. So there's this, relationship developed with a lot of these other folks. And then in May, I guess there's a huge decision day, and they know in about 2, 3 weeks they're going in, and so June 4th. I mean, they make their way up the coast, and then June 4th is the liberation of Rome, and they go in guns blazing. They clear out the beach of Anzio, which leads all the way to Rome, and then they keep moving north, and then that's the storming of Normandy that everyone saw in Saving Private Ryan.
Oh my God.
There's Donovan and the entire U.S. military storming that beach. While that's happening, the craft and these materials are all being snuck out of Italy down through the path they had recovered because everyone's focused right there in France.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it keeps lining up too perfectly. The communications we find, different parts of the story, just like constantly, we're just like, everything makes sense that all of this noise and bluster is going on. All of it to sneak out this advanced material.
And what have you guys been able to find that indicates that those were happening simultaneously? Like what are the breadcrumbs about the timing for when this was snuck out?
We're still locking that down as far as kind of hard documentation. We know that obviously it's conjecture more than anything, but what we know, well, no, we do know from the communications out of Donovan's files that there was a transfer that began on June 6th that reached Army R&D in the US on June 21st. And so we're trying to find out what ships this stuff might have gone on and like what regiment might have brought it out. Well, we have another gal we're working with, she's trying to find out if Corso was directly involved in the retrieval of the artifacts. And so we have that date in those communications, those OSS communication logs, that from June 6th to June 21st, there's this naval retrieval that reaches the US. So again, June 6th is the storming of Normandy 2 days after the storming of Anzio Beach, as Donovan and his crew made their way up the coast. So it's it's right there. It's something that was being moved out of Italy. Basically, we know that. We have that on record.
And so you think that there's probably more about that too then in these additional papers that haven't been digitized.
Yeah, the more we can dig into those communications.
Okay,
yeah.
Literally just pulled up like Google flights to Pennsylvania. I'm like not kidding. I'm like half inclined after I get off this to call my husband and be
Tell you exactly
okay, we're canceling Christmas and we're going to go to Pennsylvania next week instead.
Sorry, kids.
Yep. Actually, they would honestly, well, if we got them some candy too, they'd probably be real happy. Like they think this is so cool. So, wow. Yeah. Oh my God.
So that happens, and there's a bunch of stuff in June. There's this one particular Professor Colosi, very instrumental in all of this. Yeah, had this electromagnetic device that could stop torpedoes at a distance, and then also in reverse. I think it was German technology to set off bombs at a distance. So it was kind of the first time that technology was available.
And he was an Italian scientist?
And it was a mission. Apparently he was on the run, and there was a mission, like a hunt for him.
And that was the McGregor project?
I think it was part of it, yeah.
Okay.
We're learning that seemed to be a project in stages.
Oh,
and
okay.
So, but at some point, I don't know the timeline of this, but the OSS and the Nazis were on the hunt for him at the same time because of his technology, and the OSS found him in a convent. So I think this was part of they'd already moved some of these Italian scientists to the U.S. to work on these torpedo projects and submarine projects. And then literally the day after Ciano is executed, they're just like, we have to get Ciano to the U.S. right now. Like, we have to move on all of this. And then they tried clearing out, that area. They didn't fully succeed. More time was taken, and then they were successful, and that was the liberation of Rome that anybody can pull up on YouTube and watch.
Wow.
Sounds like the liberation of Rome was the liberation of this UFO.
Sarate and yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
and so then that happens. There's deals going on between At the same time, between Dulles and the paperclip scientists like von Braun, and then also, with that, the war criminals for Operation Sunrise, he wrote books about all this stuff. With that meant deals with the Vatican about where to send these Nazi scientists and especially the Nazi war criminals to South America, where the Vatican had such huge influence, where they would be safe.
Okay,
And
so again, for those who aren't as far down the rabbit hole as we are, can you give just a brief overview of Operation Sunrise? I've mentioned Operation or Paperclip on the podcast so many times. I'm sure people understand that. Connect Operation Sunrise to that as kind of
Sunrise, I'm not as well read up on it, but my basic understanding is that Sunrise was agreements that were made between Alan Dulles and some of those high up in the Nazi Party to allow a number of them to escape the trials at Nuremberg and basically live out their lives in Argentina, which is interesting because leading into that, there seems to be this connection between trips that were made to Antarctica and why the Nazis were setting up shop in Argentina, which was the closest country to
to
Antarctica.
Antarctica. Should we put a pin in that so that we could talk a little bit about Antarctica?
Sure.
Because I think my understanding is the Germans going to Antarctica well predates World War II.
Right.
And I guess I don't know where you want to start with the Antarctica connection, but I'm fascinated by that. And yeah.
If it's true, what I saw, some film stuff, is that Stalin had the Russians go down, the Soviets go down to like 1930, and they possibly encountered craft and non-human beings, but they didn't know what to do about it. And they went back home and they're like, "Yeah, that's what we saw." And he's like, "Okay, I don't know what to do about that."
And this is like testimony that's saying this, or like, what have you found?
I couldn't. Yeah, this was just a couple of videos I
in
saw.
all of
Just
the okay. Yeah, yep.
another thread I haven't
Yep.
had time to pull. But it would sort of make sense.
Oh, it totally does.
So, and then supposedly right after that, the Nazis sent down a crew or cruise to Antarctica, and they ran into, exotic craft and other beings who maybe have a base there.
And
maybe that was the beginning of some sort of agreement or something.
I mean, again, I'm going to just say it, like, what kind of beings, what species, was there any indication of exactly?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't want to get it wrong, kind of, because I feel like that's the specificity we're getting into now.
I know, right? Was it Nordics? Was it the praying mantis guys? What?
Right, who was good? Who was bad? I think it was the Nordics. I'm pretty sure,
Okay.
but I've heard so much back and forth about how ill or well-intentioned they were in
Right.
Nuremberg, going up to Roswell and stuff too. Even so, I don't know. Possibly somebody who felt a kinship to the Nazi ideology, basically, is what it sounds like. So even that Calmer stuff that you sent me, you kind of talked about it generally last week with Martin, but I was like, oh yeah, like thinking about that part of it again, like if perhaps the Nazis made an agreement with like some really bad and even just like physically gross,
Right.
non-human intelligence or something.
I mean, there's so much to it that just feels. I mean, not all of it can be true, probably, but the thing that I keep coming back to is not all of it can be false. And once you start, and this is what I'm sure you guys have run into, you start seeing the same thing come up over and over again, and it's like, okay, at this point, there's something to it,
Right. And again, even just for me, timelining it, if they do encounter something 3132, maybe there's an agreement, maybe they get some technology, there's some sort of transfer there. It makes even more, there's all this stuff, something that happens in 33, right? FDR gets elected. There's the failed business plot to overthrow him by Prescott Bush. and his crew, and it's all a fascist.
Okay, hold on just one second. The business plot, just for anybody, Sam or Byron, what was the podcast? Rachel Maddow did a podcast on that, the business plot. And I remember the first time I heard that was, 4 or 5 years ago. And I was in the throes of despair over Trump, and remember listening to that and being like, oh, this shit has happened before and we survived. Maybe we'll be okay. But the business plot is huge, and completely, at least main story is not UAP related, but is a huge part of history that I feel like very few people know about our country. I
didn't know until a year ago. Yeah, I had no clue.
It's wild. And for anybody interested, though I'm not some big Rachel Maddow fan, the podcast series she did on it was really incredible. Highly recommend you go listen to it.
Yeah, I'll check that out. Yeah, I had no idea. Yeah.
Okay, so all of this stuff is happening 33.
All of it's happening 33, and I think the general thing to take out of it is that you've got FDR coming into power following the crash of the stock market and the Depression, right? He's running on the New Deal, which others, he was voted in democratically, but there's a faction in the U.S. who sees it as him ushering socialism.
Yep.
Right. But that faction is like the hyper capitalist.
Yep.
And specifically Prescott Bush and his family and their peoples.
Right. And these people that do consider themselves like superior bloodlines, basically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So they hatch this plot to overthrow him, install this fascist dictator. It completely fails. But that's happening the exact same time as Hitler, it was like not the beer hall putsch, it was 10 years prior, but as, the Reichstag fire, and, Hitler basically works his way into power in Nazi Germany. And they were very closely aligned. They were already working together, Prescott Bush and his firm and their bank, and they set up a bank in 38. It's like the Bush family made their riches off of funding the Nazis.
Yeah, I've heard theories that there are supposed to be vague allusions to that connection. I don't know if you've ever seen the Spike Lee movie Inside Job.
Oh yeah, no, it's been coming up more because we found that in 96, funny enough, in the middle of, I was even reading again last night, Clinton and Podesta digging into the Roswell stuff, Area 51 stuff. The same time, 96 was when it came out that the Swiss banks were being used to funnel all this Nazi money. And that's, of course, the movie that, most directly addresses that stuff.
Which, interesting. Yeah, I never even thought about the timing of that it is. Wow.
Yeah, it's like part of me digging into, did Alan Dulles, who was, top of OSS, worked alongside Prescott Bush, eventually was director of CIA, just, his brother, just the most insane criminals of the 20th century, basically. It looks like they were involved in working with Swiss banks to run Nazi money to fund the UFO program and the CIA. So when you cut all the way forward to Clinton Podesta trying to break open, what's Area 51, what's Roswell, what's all this stuff. Wow. At the same time, these documents, somebody finds I think it was, something that was published in the 70s and republished in the 90s by the CIA. We're like, wait a minute, we found out that all this Nazi money was running through these Swiss banks.
Wow.
And there were these massive trials and all of this stuff came out. And that's when other things were happening in terms of American, Office of Naval Research destroying its labs, destroying their research and all these other, I'm still trying to fit in exactly how that timeline works in the 90s as all this stuff was coming out. And then the control group maybe was destroying evidence, hiding stuff.
And so when you say the control group, this is what maybe we know of as MJ-12 or whatever is kind of the king of the castle, or is this a different group?
Or what came later, the idea has gone around a lot the past couple of years about a breakaway civilization that was started by Alan Dulles and a lot of this missing money, missing trillions over the years. And they were building underground bases and cities and connecting them. And
okay, and so when you say they, are we talking again about essentially these bloodlines of people that think, okay, we need to take this knowledge and be preserved no matter what happens to the masses?
Actually, yeah, that's what makes the most sense. The Rockefellers and the Bushes, and then we know that they were directly connected to this stuff in the 30s and 40s. And so, yeah, that would make sense. And if it was more of them over time who were like, yeah, whatever happens, at least our bloodlines will be preserved. And we know that there are other, you know, governmental military installations, preserving plant seeds,
Right,
etc.,
right, right.
on bunkers. We know some of these things are real.
Right.
It's just like the extent of it seems to be maybe a lot bigger.
And so when does it look like that breakaway civilization planning may have begun, do you think? Like, was the idea that, okay, Bush and Dulles, and they get to the point where they're like, all right, this is looking really scary and dangerous. We're not sure what direction it's going to go. So here's our contingency. Or what do you think?
Well, my theory is that, so, post Roswell, you've got the formation of the National Security Council, the Air Force, and the CIA. And Jim Simivan said pretty recently that Truman essentially put the Air Force and the CIA in charge of figuring out what was going on. What's the UFO thing?
Right.
All
Right.
very open about it. And then through the National Security Council in late 47, and then the presidential emergency action directives that Eric Davis first talked about and now Simivan, that was where the initial secrecy was kept, right? And these emergency documents that were created by the National Security Council, by Truman, and they all made it look like it was like a post-war, like, oh, it just took 2 years after the war to get this stuff together. It's like, no, 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 this was right after Roswell. Like immediately after Roswell, they're like,
Okay.
no, right now.
So while that's happening, what are Dulles and Angleton and Bush saying? Because they knew about this before, right? So is that like another layer beyond that is,
Oh no, it's pretty out in the open. Uh, Angleton was running another off. They were running three different offices, right? Donovan, Angleton, Dulles from 45. So the OSS was disbanded in 45 by Truman. I think in September 45, because Truman was afraid of having such a centralized intelligence organization.
right? We've heard that before. Yeah.
And yeah, and then for 2 years there, Angleton, Dulles, and Donovan each had their own offices, and Prescott Bush as well. They're all running different agencies. And then right after Roswell, they're like, nope, put them back together. And so the team's all back together. And so at Prescott Bush's behest, they start recruiting for the CIA out of Skull and Bones. So specifically, let's get these,
The
sociopathic,
bloodlines.
Nazi aligning bloodline white dudes, right? Uh, and then Dulles and Angleton are there, but they're a little in the background. Dulles becomes deputy director in 51. So I
Okay,
think they were like doing their own shit.
I'm so sorry.
having
Normally,
charge.
I'm like way better about just like letting people talk, but there's so many things I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's
So,
okay.
question, because of that timing that you just described, so they kind of had their club together, and then Truman said, no, you can't have your club. And so they had to pretend like they were doing different things when I'm sure they were still coordinating, right? And all of a sudden, this event happens, which is what most Americans know is like, if you know about a UFO crash, that's the first one you know about is
Yeah.
Roswell, right? I've also heard that, it was potentially a rogue Nazi group and their craft that crashed, which I've brushed off typically because I'm a big fan of, the ET or ultra terrestrial or crypto terrestrial, whatever, but it not being us. But the way you just described it, it really sounds like, okay, if these guys helped all of these Nazis escape to South America, and it's not that different from being in league with, the mafia and saying, okay, well, we helped you guys out. We need some catalyst to get the band back together. So can you make this happen so that we can, do you think there's any viability to that? Or do you think it was definitely extraterrestrial or not
I don't
us?
know. I haven't caught up. Jason Giorgiani's been making the rounds again, and
Oh God, put a pin in that. I got to
As,
talk to you about him in a second.
problematic,
Holy shit. I really
Very-
wanted to believe him. And then I saw literally a paper he wrote about like black people having 25 points lower IQ on
Oh
average
God.
than whites. And I'm like,
Okay.
oh fuck, yeah,
Oh,
that's
man.
a bridge too far. I don't think I can
This
do it.
gets worse and worse then. I mean,
Yeah.
granted, they're just aside from that stuff, the other stuff is still just stories about the possible connection between these powerful families and the Nazis, whatever. And
Right.
I just saw it as data points. But yeah, it seems like this other stuff from him just gets more troublesome.
I know. I'm like, dude, if you
As
just
it,
could have shut up about that, like, you've got all
uh-huh.
this interesting stuff to say over here. He also apparently was like a huge supporter of Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy.
Oh my God. And
And
he's like a total Zionist and
he's a total
a bunch of other
Zionist. He's
yeah.
like, and he very much loves this idea of like clearing out the Iranian bloodline to return to
Yeah,
like
right.
white Iranians. Like, I don't know. Anyhow,
Yeah,
I
that's it
do think he
too.
says some
Yeah.
fascinating shit with the UFOs, but I'm like, okay, normally I try not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I feel
Mhm.
like there's too much
Yeah.
shit in the
I
bath
will
at this
say, yeah, I
time.
mean, it sounds like, the idea that there was some Nazi involvement in Roswell is definitely something he's been pushing a lot.
What's your gut say? I mean, because you have read so much.
My my gut says, I mean, going back a few years and even stuff that John Ramirez, said a few times and stuff I'd seen even before that, even before the stuff got really heavy, 2020, I remember one of the general stories was just that, whatever we found at Roswell had something to do with their DNA lining up with ours. And that was the most shocking thing. And they didn't know what to do about that. Like, how are we related to whatever this is, right? And now there's been all this stuff the past 2 years, future humans,
Yep.
competing timelines,
Yep.
maybe, Nazi stuff, time travel. I mean, it's just like it all gets thrown around. But my still understanding is that, there were, I guess, four beings, probably an escape pod that they ditched out of, and then they were found dead. I think one was found alive. One of the stories that goes around now is that one that was dying told the military that recovered it how to shoot down other UFOs without really thinking about it. So suddenly it also gave a leg up to the
Wait,
military.
why? Like,
I don't know, because they didn't care, they didn't think about it.
oh my
Because they're
God.
not violent. I don't know. I'm not really sure. They were asked and answered. I'm not really sure. It's all very new to me as well, and just
Whoa.
part of the lore, but in a way would sort of make sense. And so you think about again this, and there's actually another layer to that as well. But so you think about, the Rockefellers is old money, and the Bush family is new money that made their money off of funding the Nazis, right? And also, I mean, we were talking about the psychology of this, but imagine you've got Dulles and crew. They're way past, there's flying saucers and aliens or whatever's going on. They're like, oh, we can shoot them down. So we have dominance, right? So
Oh,
you think of
right.
Dulles and that crew coming out of this imperialist bloodline family, total colonizer mentality. Then they found out there's spaceships that can go anywhere, right? And also we can shoot them down and those beings are fallible. So it's like ultimate global dominance. And then you look
Oh,
at the space race, wasn't just a Cold War of who was going to nuke whom. To me, my theory is that this was about because I know the Soviets also got some of the German scientists at the end of the war.
right, right. There's so much discussion about like, okay, did they get like the second fiddle picks? Like, what was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I have no idea. But if you think about the space race as being one about who colonizes the solar system first, then it makes way more sense, right? Who reverse engineers the material and starts going to the moon and just like, no, we're going to be all Nazis or we're going to be all Soviets. That's how they saw it.
And so
That's
do
all
you
they cared.
think the rumors of Kennedy wanting it to be a joint project, do you think that that's true, that he really
Oh,
was
it's come
making
out. It
that
came out in
effort?
the papers a few weeks ago. There was a hotline between the two countries. Yeah. Like all those communications came out. Jeff found all that stuff. Like it already kind of was out there and then it came out in like the supposed like Russian stack of documents.
Which was like reason 3,912 why people wanted him dead. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, even that has become a lot easier to trace, So basically, post Roswell, formation of CIA, you've got Forrestal running the Air Force, Dulles and Prescott Bush and crew running the CIA, right? Already these opposing factions put in charge of it, right? 48, so Alan Dulles' lead co-counsel under Prescott Bush and George Herbert Walker, George H.W. Bush's father and grandfather, Averell Harriman and his brother, also this prominent banking bloodline family.
Yep.
He had owned Dresser Industries, and Dulles and Prescott Bush become majority stakeholders. And when George H.W. Bush graduates from Yale Skull and Bones in 48, they put him in charge of this company that's in charge of handling heavy construction machinery. And that's also the same year, supposedly according to UAP Gerb, that we started building the first tunnels to transport the Aztec New Mexico crash.
And so this was well, and suppose that my whole infusion into this is I really think it was Kammler that was helping us build those, because that was his entire deal in Nazi Germany. That was like
there was a whole team, team of Germans and Nazis building underground bases.
And he was the one that designed it because that was his background.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the whole thing that he didn't die at the end of the war and nobody's really quite sure where he ended up. It makes so much sense that, okay, well, if we're going to start doing intense research and we've got multiple crafts and we need to figure out a place to put all of them, and, the underground makes a ton of sense.
To transport them without anybody knowing it. And if that actually says a lot about how often they were coming down.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we have to set up a system for this.
Right. I mean,
think about that.
What do you think in terms of all of the reports, like what kind of frequency do you think this was happening, say, post World War II?
Back then, I looped back around to it last night a little bit. I never got all the way through it because it was blowing my mind, but Michael Schellenberger, in the June 2020 or July 2023 hearing, he submitted, this is before he testified in November 2024, but he did submit a 177-page document just outlining a basic history of statements and reports by people regarding cash retrievals and folks in the military and in the aerospace industry working directly with other non-human intelligence. And the way it's laid out in there, it sounded like we were bringing them down all the time.
Do you subscribe to the belief that these were like, they were gifting themselves to us somehow, like to give us information? Or do you think they were all truly like actual crashes?
I think there might have been some gifting of them by maybe more advanced species. I think whatever we've been bringing down is just also here, and they're little guys that we're related to or something. I don't really know.
Right.
But like, it just sounds like they was just over and over. Like, and that's, to me, was what became sort of mind-blowing, was seeing how almost mundane it sounded to a lot of these like Air Force colonels and stuff. It was just like a constant,
another day, another UFO, whatever.
Yeah, they're just like, well, we got this ship, we got these bodies. And they're like, yeah, just put them in these wooden boxes. Like, you know where to get them. Like, they had a whole system down. They're like, go work on the ship right now. And they go in, they're like, we don't know what they're doing. I'm like, cool, what about these bodies? Like, I don't know, just cart them away. That they don't, like, that's how sort of sociopathic these guys were.
Which honestly feels so on point. I mean, that just seems exactly like how once they've got that system dialed in, that feels exactly like how it would be handled.
Right. And it kind of, the last couple of years as well, Ross Coulthard has said, and has said it even again recently, it's like, cool, if we've been doing this since the 40s, like, is this a great way to make first contact?
Right. Oops.
Keep shooting down over and over and over to build up our Western military dominance. It sounds like that's the reality of a lot of this.
Well, and then the big question that always comes to me is, why are they letting us? Like,
That's how sort of
why aren't
hands off
they stopping?
that.
Like, why did they let Dulles and Forrestal and Bush run with this?
Well, we think that, still kind of putting stuff together, we think that Dulles made agreements with somebody else and in favor of the military dominance, building the buildup of military dominance.
So, like, in other words, one of these NHI powers.
Right. Like giving us tech to shoot down others. Yeah.
And
that's what it's.
Where do you think in terms, because the international piece I find so fascinating. We're so ethnocentric by nature. I think it's always like America, America. I love Magenta because it didn't happen here, right? And I think it also brings into focus this idea of, okay, well, what about Russia? You hear stories about like George Knapp going in and sneaking out a ton of documents. What about even the UK? Like, what are you guys finding in all of this research, even though it is obviously very centralized to our intelligence systems and the evolution of that? What is the interfacing with any of the international groups?
That the U.S. post-war became the dominant figure in the Five Eyes allies, which is, U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK.
Right.
And like the end of the war was kind of the fall of the UK's dominance and the rise of the US's dominance. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then, so now you've got the US as this melting pot, military superpower in formation, possibly becoming so with this anomalous tech that it's like trying to reverse engineer and other things are playing with. And the birth of, anti-gravity studies and a lot of this other stuff that was going on. And at the same time, with the buildup of the CIA, you've got the CIA infiltrating Central and South America, where there's a very high propensity for this stuff and where it might seem like some of these things live, right? So not only did we just overthrow some of their governments and take hold of their cheap goods and labor, it sounds like, there was this other element and we just had this constant presence and this easy way to like go and recover if anything happened. So you look at, Virginia.
I was just going to say,
there's Mage 2020, there's others, how we got there so fast and closed these areas off and recovered whatever we could. And so that's one way to look at it, and then obviously Europe, there was, still a battle over influence until the 80s or 90s at the very least between the US and the Soviets with like the Eastern Bloc and stuff. Right. So think about how long it took for the wall to come down and a lot of those countries to become more independent, more aligned with Europe than with the Soviet, what was the Soviet Union.
Right.
And then, supposedly, the Russians have had stuff. There's been a lot of weird stuff that's been found in Russia the past couple of years, megalithic structures, things like that, underground things, and supposedly craft found and then tested in like the Ural Mountains. Coulthard's talked about this. I've seen other references. Supposedly China has its own AI system to track things, but otherwise they've been more secretive than anybody else about their potential history. But there's been a lot of really good videos, and then now a few people have come out over the past couple of years, and there's one guy who's been making the rounds the past few weeks who I'm behind on, but he actually went on Martin's show right after you did last week.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember hearing he was going to, and then I haven't watched it yet. But
yeah, I just haven't caught up yet. Yeah. But so it's like everyone knows this stuff, and there's sightings all over the place, and but just the U.S. made it central to their military dominance, basically.
And it's just interesting for me to think about it in the lens of today. And, I know America has not been the darling internationally for quite a while, but I would imagine at this point we've kind of hit, bottom of the barrel in terms of how we're viewed on the international stage. And you have to wonder what some of those other powers are thinking, even as the UN tries to kind of figure out how to operate separate from its black sheep child at this point? Like, at what point do groups like that take the reins and say, okay, we're controlling the narrative now?
Right. And I already felt like I was following a convergence since Grusch. I mean, really right after Grusch, like a week or so after was when AI was unleashed into most operating systems and,
Everybody can do it. Yeah.
search engines, etc. Right. So I was watching that, I run a little record label. It's like I watched how it helped um, copyright digital material online as like YouTube and then brought it in.
Right.
It's like we know these waveforms in a split second. That's this person owns the rights to this music, right?
It's
And
so
then think
fascinating. I
about,
love that because I never think about it through that lens that like, okay,
yeah,
that's a really nice silver lining to think about.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think post Grush, this has been uh, almost a rapid scale push towards decentralization of power, right? So you look at that and on its base level, right? Let's say monetize my channel, monetize my podcasts,
Right.
my TikTok, my Substack, my Medium, etc. Right? Think about everything, and as like corporate power hasn't, as it's already been just losing money over time, trying to hold on to its old power, it's pushing more and more people, more journalists and writers, artists, etc., to like, well, I'm just going to go online and have a channel and do my thing
Yep.
and do my own journalism, but it's actually, I don't have an editorial board now, so I can say whatever the fuck I want, right?
Right.
Becomes more honest, right? Becomes more authentic.
Right.
Um, so that's been a huge part of it for me on like a socio-political level and socioeconomic level, that we're in this shift of like we're working for ourselves more than anything, right? So there's one aspect
Right.
protected with this AI, these AI systems that are in place.
Right.
Another is this shift towards the blockchain and Bitcoin. And obviously at the gate, it's messy because of the pump and dump aspect. And, it's like the idea of there's been no regulation and Bankman-Fried and his trial, just all the people ripping each
Right.
other off.
Right.
But it is like, we've already had the PayPal mafia, and PayPal and Venmo, though, is this basic process of like peer to peer, right?
Right.
We
Right.
go to dinner. Cool. Here's $20.
Yeah.
I don't have cash. I don't need cash.
Right.
I don't need to spend $2 or $3 every time I pull money at an ATM. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So instead, then you get more and more into the Bitcoin aspect when it's safer and it's not about hedging bets, but about like just that's my personal bank. Cool.
Right.
Here's my money. There's no bank. Think about it. We're eliminating the banks.
But like, they're not going to let that happen. I feel like, you know
Doesn't
what I
fucking
mean?
matter. Fuck them. It doesn't matter.
Well, that's what I'd like to think. But if you look at the
So then,
history, right?
okay, but then think about also where we are now and the Epstein of it all, right?
Oh God.
It's
Yeah.
not just the human crimes aspect. It's also how tied into the banking system it is. And supposedly how tied into the CIA and the Mossad and Israel. And
Yep.
all these names are coming together. Oh, cool. Peter Thiel, Ehud Barak, just like
100%.
major names, just like, oh no, you're all in this orbit. And maybe that's how you all collapse. And so you look at that as like, that's happening as especially the younger generations understand how fucked they are, right? We can't buy homes. We're never going to be able to afford to buy homes.
Yep.
Everyone's in debt.
Yep.
Everything's expensive.
Going to college
Now
is
we're
a
living
death
under,
sentence financially. Yeah.
right. Now we're, under a straight up authoritarian regime. We're under a climate crisis. Everything is so extreme right now, right? Meanwhile, you've got Chris Mellon and folks, age of disclosure and stuff, just like, no, we're gonna have clean energy. We just like have to admit this other stuff exists.
Right.
And it has.
Well, and
And we
and get rid of the
peacefully live on the
lobbyists
inside.
and get
Right.
entirely new elected officials and yeah.
All of that too. So think about everything that's happening, even right now with the shutdown, why the shutdown's happening, the various, consequences of it on the working class level and how
Yeah.
little, obviously. Meanwhile, Trump and crew are throwing these like great Gatsby parties.
Right. And like, no, it's great. What are you guys talking about? Everything's amazing. Cheapest
Right.
Thanksgiving ever. Yeah.
Right. So again, though, I mean, think about the conversions, right? We've got even next week as the age of disclosure doc. We have the Epstein documents could come out any day now, and they're voting in Grijalva into the House, and she's the final vote. And so either that gets passed and comes out, or Trump vetoes it, which is also bad for him.
Right.
It's kind of like
How
we all
has
know
nobody
that
leaked
is
that?
like
I don't understand
massive
that.
breaking.
Okay, so here's the thing
Everything's
though.
open.
I know, and you and I, it's funny because in our conversations, I feel like you're always keeping me from falling so far down the depths of despair.
It's like
Like,
kind of my
okay,
job with my
it's
friends.
it's gonna be okay, and I want to believe you. And also, I look around and I feel like at the same time that we've got this wonderful, like, open access to so much information,
Hmm.
we've got so many people that don't know what to do with that. And then this other
Right.
faction of people that whatever system we've encountered throughout the history of mankind has been there to take advantage of those who
Hmm.
don't know what to do with this resource, right? And I look
Right.
at like my parents' generation, or even, I think about, okay, if you're a single mom and you're trying to feed 3 kids, you don't have time to dig into whether something is true or not. You're going to do what pops in front of you and assume that that's true. And it's gotten to the point where I almost feel like an understanding of what we're experiencing has become a
Mhm.
privilege in and of itself. And
Yeah.
that
Oh, yeah.
maybe it's just a growing pain and maybe it settles out and things
Hmm.
even out. But it really
Right.
freaks me out that we feel so vulnerable right now to this ever present lurking
Mhm.
overlord organization or people
Mhm.
or bloodlines who are very happy to take advantage of that situation.
Oh, sure. But I'm seeing, and this kind of this other project I'm working on, to me, it all also, there's a convergence there and it all ties together,
Well,
like
explain a little bit about that for if whatever you can explain about it. That is, I know you probably can't say a ton, but what you can say about it for
sure,
the
yeah.
audience.
The basic idea is that, Michael and I are working with other people on like an AI database, and there's still parts of the new technology, like the blockchain, that I'm still understanding, but the basic idea is that, okay, so think about, I mean, it kind of started, our involvement with this crew and the idea for this app was partly born out of the notion that there's this lost history of UFO lore and reality that's been buried and obfuscated and intentionally mislabeled, etc. Right? So
But
post
ultimately,
Rush
that there
especially.
are like tangible documents and tangible history there. It's just been buried.
Right,
Yeah.
so think about the folks who've been around forever, Stanton Friedman, Stringfield, Richard Dolan, oh, we have case studies, we have all those things, right? Like, oh, this stuff just kept happening for time. Here's all these stories. You have somebody like Dolan and Friedman, especially, who were looking over time more into, the national security state. And Stanton Friedman was a physicist, so he's looking at like what physics studies were being done that were being kept suppressed. Whereas maybe Dolan is looking more at like what governmental powers were doing this stuff.
Right.
And so you've got guys who've been doing this for a long time and open about it. We have all this entertainment, all these movies, all these things, supposedly some folks getting insider information,
Yep.
Spielberg in the 70s, etc.
Yep.
And then, so, the majestic documents, the various leaks of those, how much was true, how much isn't, the work by Ryan and Robert Wood to try and authenticate that stuff, their personal involvement in the subject already, all of this stuff over time, right? And we all know, like, cool, 80 years we've been lied to. There's obviously, like, most people know this now, if they know anything about this at all. That's just like a general, like, yeah, Roswell happened, give us our flying saucer back, whatever.
Right. Right.
And so now we're at this point where there's this like wealth of information, and we're only as good as our memories, for one. Two, these new AI systems are being updated and integrated pretty at a pretty rapid pace, and however honest they are. I mean, that's been a huge issue, obviously, with Grok and these other things, but
Oh God.
some of them are getting better. I don't follow everything super closely enough to have like a full conversation about comparing any of those things, but I just know in general, some of them are getting better and faster and smarter.
Right.
But they're also only as good as the information they're being given. So it has to be well sourced. And so Michael and I, especially, going into this, having just pushed so hard for so long in the straight up like gumshoe detective way, just like reading and reading and reading and kind of remembering and remembering this other thing and just like,
Right. And I have to point out, like, spending so much time and energy on it too. I think that's something that people take for granted. Like, you look at the number of hours that you and Michael have spent uncovering things and then assembling that information for other people to read and understand. I love the idea of open source and everybody's got access to this, but I think it's sometimes easy to forget that somebody put a shitload of work
yeah,
to get this
right,
information in front of you.
right, yeah.
You guys have given up a lot.
Just a weird drive, obsession, mission as this can be for, a lot of folks.
Yeah. Well,
And part of it too, it's not just the wow factor and the weirdness factor, but yeah, understanding the beneficial factor and the sort of like humanistic, like, cool, we're not at like the very good spot in humanity. Like
right,
as we're on this like speeding train into the future,
right.
there's any number of tracks we could be on. And so which one do we push towards? So part of the way I've been looking at how this database can function is I'm on TikTok a lot and I follow these different researchers, out of the UAP stuff, just other lines of threading things together. And so think about Epstein stuff and that story trying to be buried, but over time people are like digging into the flight logs.
So
Cool,
funny,
here's all the
QAnon
things.
came back to bite itself in the ass. Like, it just
Oh
took
yeah.
long enough.
They just got trained
Yep.
just well enough.
Yep.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so you look at just something like that where it's like, well, here's all the information we have, all the documentation. Here's all the names that we know are in these things, right? Whatever that means. There's that. There's now, because of the financial situation, I'm seeing more people online go through the bloodline stuff. How are the banking systems built? Who are running these elite families? What was the robber baron class? And you start to see that was all the same people. There's the UFO stuff, obviously. How much of these documents are true? There's all this weird CIA shit we're finding now because of the laws that did pass. At the very least, we're having these things go to the National Archives and be declassified, and then people learning to write FOIA requests and things like that. And so, people looking at defense contractors, people looking at Blackstone, and property and all, just like all of the ways that this like machinery that we're living in has been built, right? It's one giant web of bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like still hell set in elite class. And then you've got a base of all these people underneath it, just more and more driven to at least understand it, if not dig into it themselves, because research is its own thing. So kind of the principle in general, we started to understand more and more how this could function, not just with the UAP stuff, but in general, is like, again, it's let's say your TikTok videos might be going viral. Like, blah, 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 blah. Here's the 5 guys involved in this
Right.
conspiracy.
Right.
But then you're still only as good as like, oh, I saw this video the other day. How does it connect to this other thing?
Right. Like, actually memorializing all of that.
Right. So now if you have this database, and it's basically all personal too. And so it's not centralized. Again, another decentralized effort to sort of break out the power dynamics and then sort of monolithic power structure. But you get to set up your own system. And people have been playing with this for a couple of years, but this is, sort of an extension of that. It's like you get to set up your own system and put into it whatever you want and see whatever sense the AI can make of it, right? You can do that on your own. But you can also do these group sort of research endeavors where more people hop on board to this chain of information. And with that, vote in or out the authenticity of documentation and sources.
So you've got consensus among a larger group
Right.
that's helping vet the stuff that, I mean, it's the
Yes.
reason I look at Reddit for an answer to a lot of questions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right, right. So let's say, I mean, whatever happens with Epstein in the next week or two or something, it's gonna be all this flood of information possibly,
Right.
right? So imagine it's just like there's just so much. And people are like digging through and it's like thousands and thousands of documents, right? And it's just too much for anybody to make sense of. But it's also how, a lot of law firms are using AI now to look at case law
Right.
and be like, what precedent do we have that sounds like this? Bam, here you go. This
Right.
case, 1942, whatever,
Yeah.
that's how case law works. And so you can basically build these narratives of like who was in charge, who made these deals, who got in trouble, where did the money go, who died, who was killed, who died suspiciously, just like build this giant web of like what is going on here, right? And
Wow.
so yeah, that's the most basic way I can put it is that it'll build this kind of open source research avenue to really understand these webs and these threads and make them searchable, and not just searchable in the document by document thing, but in the sort of the way that ChatGPT and these things work, where you're like, tell me about this. And
Right.
sure, this might take time, and we're learning about, prompt engineering and all that, but they're going to get better and faster, but it's like, tell me whatever you can specifically about
This.
these people in this organization in this time period, right? Just think about it generally that way. Of
Well,
like,
and I
thank
mean,
you, kind of.
what we're excited about, obviously, the UFO stuff, but I think about just obfuscated history in general. I mean,
Right.
remember, I learned about the Tulsa race riots from watching the
Right.
Watchmen
Me
TV
too, yeah.
series. And I
Most
was
people
like,
do.
how in the hell do I not know about this in my country's history,
Yeah,
right?
we
Like,
we literally implemented Juneteenth right afterwards.
oh, I didn't know that those
I
really?
Yeah,
Like,
there
as a
been no
nation, we
Juneteenth
recognized
until
it. Have we
yeah,
undone
there
that? I feel like he must have undone that at this point. But
yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
like those are the things. How many more stories like that exist that we're literally
right.
going to lose as a society if we aren't carefully uncovering things before they all get burned or before things, the last
Mm,
witness dies off? Or I
yeah.
love this idea for there isn't somebody at the top controlling what, history is written by the victor, right? Like
Yeah.
to kind of undo that
Hmm.
premise.
Right. And even, I mean, that Tulsa race riot, being uncovered or, shed light on by Watchmen is a completely perfect example. Yeah. Because nobody had talked about it. And
My
I
husband has
remember
a
reading
history
it.
degree and I think he's like really smart. And we were both sitting there and we're like, what?
Right.
I've got my phone open and I'm like, wait, this is real? This happened?
Yeah.
Like it's gross. Or the business plot, like you were talking about, these
Right.
are things that would help inform how people look at their present existence in our society. And
Right.
that's hugely valuable. Do you guys have a timeline for when, like, and is it going to be an app or is it going to be,
No, it's going to be an app. Um, don't have a timeline, and we just started working on like an alpha version of test in the last week, but it's so fresh out of the gate. I mean, there's a structure to it, but it's not very functional at all yet. We've done some like really basic stuff and sent some really basic notes, and so, we're trying to figure out like, cool, I mean, can we make this our gig for a little bit?
right? No
Because it's
kidding.
gonna be
And
a lot of work. Already
right,
put a lot of work into this for free,
right.
This is gonna be, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a big deal when it's ready. So
Well, if you
we've been
need
working on that.
testers, I'm happy to
Oh
do
yeah, I
anything.
mean that's part of it too that we've sort of explained to them is like one, they know our story and our research into the Magenta and how thorough it is, and we've walked them through it a lot. And in a way, this stuff that we're doing is going to be a great stress test because we're teaching it how, one, to transcribe different documents,
Mm,
especially really hard to read stuff, things like that. But I've been
huge.
watching AI is getting better at transcribing that stuff. And then two, understanding how the information is talking to each other and the stuff that we know off the top of our heads because we're so in deep. Now we can tell if it's like getting it wrong.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then, but it also like part of the idea is that you might be presented with part of a story, and any user, you can do it for yourself or anybody can do it with as part of a group, is then you feed it some more documentation and watch how the story builds out and tell it like build me a timeline. So you get part of the timeline, like here's some more stuff. Like, cool, here's updated timeline. And you just keep
And it
doing
keeps the
that.
macro vision building while you're inserting. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, actually I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, it's a good term.
That's, oh my
Um,
God. That's really
so
exciting.
yeah, it is. And but also, that one, we're so tied into so many other researchers in this field, and there's all these other people I follow, and I'm still finding more people on TikTok just getting into like I'm finding all these weird names and connections to Mossad or Epstein or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and I'm like, cool, do you have a Substack? And they're like, yeah, I haven't like this is total mess for me, and I haven't like written anything down. I'm like, don't worry, I'm gonna like follow you, hold that place. We'll
Yeah.
circle back, and
Oh, I
like
love that.
when this thing is ready, I'm just gonna start blasting it out. So
Oh my God.
I
Okay.
think then we'll get even better testers who are all working in their own time and sending in notes and stuff, and they get to hire more developers. Like it should all like accelerate, but also then when it's ready to go, I would think that getting a paid user base for whatever they want, if it's $5 or whatever,
Yeah.
5, $10 or something, then it's like out the gate. Even people will say like, "Cool, I'll try it for a month." But it's like if we get it, we nail it, and you get all these people who are like just going through it, and they're like, "Cool, I have like a place to put it." Like every time I find something that feels important,
Right.
bam, there it goes. And it's not just that, but it's like you're not just doing it with news sources and documentation. Now you can also you're transcribing and summarizing YouTube videos, interviews, and stuff, and abstracting scientific papers. Things like you just get to throw all of it in. And the whole idea for me eventually is like super master timeline.
Which is
Any
like,
point in history, like what was happening in science, politics, private industry, aerospace, weird shit,
oh,
whatever,
and
just like
you've got your unified field theory map.
maybe, yeah. Could be.
Incredible. Well, okay, so Craig, honestly, I feel like we could talk for another 3 hours, and I've got a
Um,
list of questions already from what we discussed. But
okay.
before we wrap up for today, what I really want to make sure you tell everybody is where they can go and read the articles that you've written about this and kind of, I guess, hear updates about the continuing work for this app. I don't know if you guys even have a name for it yet, but again, just
There's a name, but I don't think, yeah, it's so young and new and
okay.
not,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So the nameless cool mapping crowdsource research app. Yeah, I just really want to point people in the direction of actually looking at the stuff that you've put together and remembering, behind all of this research, there are real people doing real work, and throw them a bone if you can.
Sure, yeah. I have a Medium account called Escape Velocity. I set it up over 2 years ago, I think right after Grusch came out, and it was hard to contain, some of my excitement, and then a bunch of life stuff happened, and I kind of left it alone for a while until I started working on this huge thread about yeah, ties between the George Bush family and Dulles and his family and the CIA and UFOs and big oil and all these things. I started to see it as like one master thread in and of itself. So I wrote this huge 8-part thread and did an interview with UAP Curb about it. But so I've got a Medium account. It's called Escape Velocity. I'm trying to put everything up for free. partly because I couldn't figure out the payout system. And so and also because, the more this goes on, the more people get frustrated with the idea of, grifters and gatekeeping and all this. And so,
yeah, you're really like laughing your way to the bank with this. Let me tell you, Craig, if there's one thing I've heard in our conversations, that it's, you have to get off your private jet and your yacht to come talk to me for a minute. So,
yeah. I mean, it's been an experiment, but it's done okay. People have been pretty generous, so it's like, cool, it's up for free. There's a tip jar, we've all got him now.
Well, and I think, I read a lot of this stuff online. Obviously, one of my favorite things about what you write specifically is you've got so many sources and you've got primary source documents like involved in the thread. It's not just somebody rambling. It's like you get to watch a part of that web get connected. And it's some of my favorite content to read that's out there. So thank you for continuing to do that.
Yeah, of course.
I really appreciate it. Glad we and hopefully we can steal you back for part 2 because as long as we talked, I still feel like we barely scratched the surface. There's so much.
Of course. Yeah. Plus, I mean, I'm, a lot of us are so like hyper focused on just, especially now, it's real nitty gritty research that it's definitely, it's really nice to be able to pull out and contextualize a lot of it.
Oh yeah, I can see the forest for the trees for a second before I dive back in.
Yeah, and even, we just talked for 2 hours and I had some notes and there are other things I'm working on. I'm like, there's all this other crazy timeline stuff and we went nowhere near any of it.
I know, me too. I literally have a 25-page Google Doc that I was like, okay, this, and I'm the same. I'm like, shit, we talked about all this great stuff.
Time we just address that.
Right. We'll be like, nope, Kelly, stop going down a rabbit hole. No side quests. Stick to the timeline. We'll do that again soon, honestly, if you've got time for it, because this is, I so appreciate this. I just think it's amazing, and it's, a huge service you're doing. So thank you so much, Craig. And thanks, Michael, out there too. And we'll talk to you again real soon.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks again. It's been great.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.
I'll talk to you soon. Yeah. Bye.
You've been listening to an Audio Wool original, produced by Byron McCoy. Theme music is provided by Yawns. For more programs like this, visit audiowool.co.